I'm Mike Govoni, and for the last 15 years, I've been in recovery from addiction and on the deepest quest to find healing, to experience my own unique wholeness beyond the story of what happened to me. By taking an integrative, holistic approach to experience transformation, I bring you the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast, a show dedicated to people in recovery who are looking for deeper healing and transformation. As I like to say, we all have a story. When life has been rather difficult for us, we can sometimes tend to think we are the only one on the planet that has gone through what we have experienced. But I want to say you're not alone. We all have a story. One thing I believe when you heal from your story is it no longer belongs to you. It's for someone else to heal from. So today I thought I'd bring you the Healing Beyond Recovery's first solo show with me as your host and guest, as I'll be sharing in depth about my personal journey of how I overcame childhood trauma, addiction, chronic illness to have a profound shift in consciousness and find my life's purpose to be of service and support others along their journey of healing and transformation. As Rumi says, in order to give light, one must burn first. So if you feel like you've gone through or are going through the fire, I get it. Hang in there. You just might be going through the very initiation process you need to evolve on your journey here on Earth. As the quote goes, no mud, no lotus. We need the darkness to awaken us to the light. Or as one of my personal mentors, Mastin Kipp, says, your trauma is a prerequisite to your purpose. So it's by going through the difficulties and transmuting our pain and suffering, we are reborn into something greater, like the phoenix rising from the ashes. Be sure to listen all the way through to the end of the episode, as I'll be sharing some of my personal daily habits and routines to help you cultivate self-care. I'll also be sharing some of the most beneficial practices and modalities that have helped me heal, and also answer a few popular questions that people have asked me along the way. I hope this episode inspires you, that you can overcome your story and embrace whatever difficult you may be facing so you too can find healing and purpose and thrive in life like you never knew was possible. Episode 8, here we go. I want to start by saying, if we look at the research when it comes to addiction, when it comes to childhood trauma, when it comes to early onset disease, there was a study done that shines more light on this, I think, than any other topic or research study rather. And that's the study of the adverse childhood experiences, where in 1997, they took about 18,000 participants and had them fill out a questionnaire in regards to their upbringing and what they experienced in childhood and some of the outcomes and things they were dealing with as adults. And they came across some really evident research that what you experience in childhood directly affects you as an adult. So I share that because not many people actually make the correlation of why they became addicted, right? How they became to be this way, maybe suffering from mental illness or addiction or weight issues or sex addiction or shopping addiction, whatever it may be. And they don't link their biography to their biology. And in fact, they're very much connected, right? So early on, as I share with you in my own personal journey of healing from childhood trauma, addiction, and chronic illness, when I was in the hospital suffering from universalis ulcerative colitis, my whole colon was ulcerated. Do you think the guy in the white coat ever said, "Hey, Michael, tell me what happened to you as a child, right? What did you live through? What's your relationship with your parents like?" No, none of those questions were ever asked me, but yet they had a direct effect on what was happening to me in my body. At 25 years old, as I sat in his office after a colonoscopy, and he gave me that diagnosis. So I hope this episode shine some light on the correlation of how we came to be this way, right? As one of my mentors came up with these 3 living questions. In fact, that is the first question in his living questions. And when it comes to healing, healing requires us to hang out in the unknown, right? It requires us to live questions, requires us to embrace the uncertainty and experience the process, because healing happens in the present moment. It can happen with a shift in consciousness. It can happen as, connecting 2 huge pieces of your life that come together that make sense for you, right? And there's also a difference between healing and curing. So curing, we're trying to fix you. We're trying to get somewhere. We're trying to make something happen, right? Cure a disease. And of course, we want both in some aspect, healing and curing, but sometimes there's healing and no curing. Sometimes there's curing and no healing. And when I say healing beyond recovery, because that's the name of my coaching program and the name of my brand, so to speak, is what I mean by that is to experience your own wholeness before the trauma of what happened. So to shift this into addiction in a different context is we become addicted because things happen to us, not because something is wrong with us, right? Trauma dysregulates the nervous system. We don't feel safe. We didn't have support, right? And finding that healing is discovering that wholeness beyond the story, beyond the identification with the shame or burdens that you may be holding. And many of us who are in recovery, who have suffered from addiction, carry a lot of shame and unworthiness and feelings of less than, because we've gone through a lot, right? Things have happened to us. And yet a lot of the recovery community doesn't make this correlation between the things that happened to us in childhood directly affect us as, in adults. And addiction is an attempt to regulate your nervous system, right? So my kind of hypothesis is, if you were down-regulated, so to speak, well, in the polyvagal theory, it's called dorsal vagal shutdown, right? Not enough energy in the system. Then maybe you liked uppers because maybe cocaine and methamphetamines did it for you and they allowed you to feel alive and full of energy and all that good stuff. Or maybe you're like me and your nervous system was just at threshold all the time and full of anxiousness and worry and fight or flight response, and downers did it for you. So maybe opiates put you in that zone of relaxation and feel like you can finally come home to yourself and that sort of thing. So I really believe that we're trying to regulate our nervous system, and the substance always does something for the person, right? When I used to work as a recovery coach in 3 major hospitals to support the opiate epidemic, I would always ask them, what does this do for you? What does heroin do for you? What does meth do for you? What does cocaine do for you? Right? And they would give me these answers and I would say, great. Instead of shaming them, I just say, great, right? They're trying to communicate with others, right? Maybe they need a couple beers to be able to actually speak because what they went through, they had no voice when they were a child, or the heroin, worked on the same pathways as a mother's love because their mother was taken away from them, right? So the substance is always doing something for the person. And I like to shine some light on this because not a lot of people know why they used substances, right? Not a lot of people know why they used substances, and it's really to escape the pain. Right? They take us away from ourselves and feeling that pain and sense of helplessness. So as my journey begun quite early with trauma, as I was swimming in a sea of cortisol in my mother's womb, because my mom discovered my father's secret while I was in utero. And I have a very deep story. We could sit here for probably 2, 3, 4 hours. So I'm going to kind of briefly go over each chapter here with you instead of getting into the details. But I'll give you, the hardcore, let's just say, experience of what I went through in a detailed way, maybe like I've never done before. But yes, so my mom discovered my dad's secret. And before my dad, at this time, he was a religious figure. He was a born-again Christian preacher. And before that, my dad came into my grandmother's home with full Roman Catholic robes on a mission from God to marry my mom, who was 17 years his junior. So he was like 35, mom was maybe 16, something like that. And my God-loving Portuguese grandmother gave my mother away to him because back in those days, having a priest come in your house or something like that, or a doctor, you really didn't question them. And, hey, what a gift it is to have a clergyman. So my dad derobed, married my mom, and had intercourse very few times in which my sister and myself were born. So my mom discovered his secret through finding pornography the same way I did when I was 16 years old. And my mom began to panic, obviously. She was a head of a big congregation with my dad and a lot of, people of the church. And all of a sudden she finds out her husband is watching pornography of the same sex. It wasn't children pornography, but it was young adult pornography. And she didn't know what to do, and she panicked. And I'm in her womb, and I imagine that's why I developed neurological problems and immune problems down the road, just because of that experience in utero. If I had to think in terms of epigenetics, that experience really traumatized my nervous system in the womb. So I was swimming in some cortisol, a sea of cortisol there, and it really, primed me for disease later on in life, I believe. Once again, coming back to the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Now, I'm not even quite a child yet, but just a little infant in my mom's uterus, and yet I'm already experiencing the symptoms of trauma in there. I came out, I was 8 pounds, 4 ounces. I was a little blue, they say, and they had to tip me upside down, and tap my feet to get some oxygen back in me. And I was on my way from there. And to fast forward, my mom suffered because of the trauma she experienced as a young woman, and obviously this event that she is now in with my dad, and she began to use alcohol. So once again, it's not so much that I believe alcoholism and drug addiction is genetic. I believe if the genes are there, then environment is what triggers it. So my mom had a lot of trauma, right? And we know this from the research that trauma is actually passed down from generation to generation, right? And if you're on the other end of this as a listener and you're doing your deep work and healing your own trauma, then you're what's referred to as a transitional character, as someone who in a single generation is doing their work so they can heal all the generations before them. So if you're listening to this and you're doing your deep work, kudos to you, hats off to you for really being a agent of change in the world, because so many of us are suffering from trauma in so many different ways. And the world really needs us, the transitional characters, to come and really heal the lineages so we can shift the generations and establish a sense of connection, well-being, and safety in the generations to come, in our children and our grandchildren. So trauma is passed down generationally, and mom had a lot of trauma, and she used alcohol. And when I was, I think, 3 years old, my sister was 5, my mom lost custody of us to my father. So I grew up in a beach town, about 30 miles south of Boston called Marshfield. And, nothing was really normal or typical about my childhood. My dad lived a very secret life. We never really knew who he was. I knew he was a religious figure, and in my mind, I guess, let's just say, he was, a symbol of God to some degree. I was the minister's son. I was pouring grape juice for everyone at church and, kind of involved in the festivities. Although there was always part of me, once again, I was super defiant as a young kid, full of anger because of everything, as you can only imagine. Being separated from your mom at 3 years old, and I was full of rage, full of piss and vinegar, and I watched the church thing go on with my dad as a clergyman, but I always knew something wasn't right with it. I always knew something wasn't right, and as I would get older, I would kind of discover what was going on, and even to this day, more is being revealed about that whole thing in religiosity, and if you were brought up in a religious household and have religious trauma, then welcome. I understand. I understand that too. And that is a very traumatizing thing in itself. And from my mother's side of the family, all the generations have done what's called spiritual bypassing, which, they can just hand it over to Jesus or the church and everything is okay. Now, once again, I think Jesus, this isn't to bash the church or to say something's wrong with the church. What I'm saying is when you use spirituality or religion to bypass your trauma, then you often end up in a difficult place and can often cause more harm than good. And I think that's really what happened, especially with my father as a religious figure. He was super eclipsed by the dark shadow of himself, and he projected that and used that to really destroy others and himself ultimately at the end. So if you have that religion trauma, religiosity in your background, I get it, and it can be very, very difficult, especially if you're being that transitional character and jumping out of that framework to find your own truth. So that's a whole topic in itself. But I know many people can identify with that. And growing up, in that was rather awkward. My dad, like I say, was the head of a church, and it was kind of like he was worshipped in a way, and we were the children, my sister and I, and that was an interesting dynamic. But like I say, it never really made total sense to me. I never was bought into it, although I took what I took out of it. Like I always talked to the angels, right? Like I was like asking the angels for help, and we had a pond near our home in Marshfield, and a lot of other friends fell through that pond, but I always prayed before I got on the ice. And I look back and I said, I bet you that prayer saved me. And I never fell through the ice because I would always pray before I got on the ice, even as a little kid. But anyways, I always felt connected to spirit, always felt connected to the angels. Michael the Archangel, he's still my boy today. I bring him along with me and ask him for help. But I often kind of was questioning what was going on with all the religious stuff that I was seeing. And as time got on, I left the church there with my dad, and I got into smoking pot and drinking and finding my escape that way. I rebelled, right? I rebelled. I found the older kids to hang out with. And I was like this young little guy, like 13, 14 years old, with all these other older kids, maybe 18. And I was like partying and hanging with them. But my journey really started at 11 when I smoked my first joint on that pond that I was talking to you about, ice skating. We were playing ice hockey. And I smoked my first joint and I got really stoned, and I think I cried. I think I felt a little claustrophobic and panicky, and I cried, and then I was laughing, and I went home and I had some beef stew, and I told my sister, I'm like, I just smoked my first joint. She's like, no way, nah. And I was like, yeah. And then I was off to the races, as they say, right? I was off to the races. I was, using, started with wine coolers, and then before you know it, Jack Daniels and Jim Beam, stealing, liquor out of a friend's mother's liquor cabinet down in Burke's Beach in Marshfield, and getting drunk on the beach. And it was just a crazy time. My father really had no control over me. He really didn't have a strong paternal instinct, and I had no container as a child, right? As parents, we contain our children. I don't have children, but I learn and read a lot about it. And we have to contain the child, and as the child gets a little rambunctious, the parent meets them there and exceeds to hold that energy and contain them and let them know, I'm here, and basically I got you. And I never had that. I was like a free for all. I would do whatever I had to do, and I would say whatever I had to say. And it brings me back to, a diagnosis they give children is oppositional defiant disorder, right? And is it really oppositional defiant disorder, or is it trauma, right? Is the child suffering from trauma, or does he have some sort of diagnosis, right? That's another thing. We have to diagnose everyone with all these things and topics, so the insurance companies can get billed and paid for. But really, what's at the root? And I've found from my own experience that a lot of these things, anxiety, depression, things of that nature, I suffered from them all too, was a result of unhealed, unprocessed trauma. So, as a kid, I struggled in school, and, I was bouncing in and out and skipping classes and getting stoned. And, it was very difficult to have an alcoholic mom who would come in and out of her life, in and out of my life, and in a father that was totally kind of absent and vacant. And, it was very troublesome because from the dynamic, of what my dad was experiencing, I think because of my dad's secrecy in that he suffered as a gay man in the closet and hadn't come out, that, he had a son, and he knew I would get older one day and probably, look at him differently. And I imagine because of the dynamic, he projected a lot of things on me. At least that's how it felt. So I was always like the black sheep of the family. My sister could never do wrong. And I felt that. And that was difficult, right? So maybe if you were like the black sheep of the family, and you suffered from addiction, then I'm sure you felt that too. I'm sure you felt that too. And I think it's interesting when I come across people that have brothers and sisters, but they're not addicts and alcoholics. And the reason for that is, even though the children may experience similar traumas in the household, depending upon the resiliency of their nervous system, right, and whether or not they got support or not during what was happening, can really affect whether or not they become addicted to substances or not. So my sister isn't a recovering addict or alcoholic. She can drink in safety, and she partied, and we partied together, and she, can, do her thing and touch in and come out. And yet I was using drugs and alcohol like crazy, trying to escape the pain because the dynamic was different for me, right? I never felt that connection to my parents, at least my father anyway. And so if you're in a family dynamic and you're the only one that became an alcoholic or addict, bring some light to that, or some curiosity or contemplation in what you experienced, maybe in what your brother and sisters didn't. And that's not always the case per se. Some other people experience some of the more deeper traumas, such as sexual molestation, and their brother and sister may not, even though the household was intact and fairly, supported. But it's really interesting to see how each child gets affected and who becomes addicted and who doesn't. So my sister, still to this day, she does her thing, and of course I'm on my journey in recovery here. But everyone gets affected differently, and trauma affects people differently. And like I say, some people have a different inner resilience where their nervous system can take more of that difficulty or wounding and not feel that sense of helplessness and then go to a substance to get out of it or self-medicate. So I started at 11. I ended at 21. Right, I got sober at 21. But I did everything. I didn't use drugs intravenously, but I met my match, let's say, with Oxycontins at about 16 to 18 years old. We started partying them. I remember the first time I got an Oxycontin, and I sniffed it with a buddy, 4 buddies actually. We split it in 4s, and I was lights out. I couldn't even pick my head up. I was chucking nods. I remember we were on a buddy's boat, actually, that was parked in the marina down in Marshfield, and the cops came, and I couldn't even talk to them. That was like so unlike me. Normally I could mingle and get my way out of anything, and this time I couldn't even respond. I was just conked out. And at the same time, I felt like I'd come home, right? I felt like I'd come home. I felt like I was wrapped up in that warm blanket, as a buddy would say. I know from an old buddy from AA, he would say, when I drank my first drink, it felt like I was wrapped up in that warm blanket that came out of the dryer. And as we know from the research, those same pathways of a mother's love and that connection get lit up when we use opiates. So I think that's a huge thing for me, is being taken away from my mom at 3 years old and then finally finding opiates. They were like, I've come home. I'm really feeling this. And I did that for about 2 or 3 years. And at the end, I was doing $500 a day. Yes, that's not a mistake. $500 a day in Oxycontins. And how did I afford that? Well, what do? You sell them, right? That's what I did. And I hustled them, and I used them for free, let's say. And I had a really, really thick habit, and I was in the throes of addiction, and for the first time in my life I felt powerless. That was the first time I ever felt powerless over a substance. I have a very strong will. They talk about in AA that we tend to not have a lot of willpower. Well, I challenge that, because I have the willpower of a silverback gorilla maybe, and but those did me in, and I came to the point where I was at a fork in the road, and I knew I either had to get off these or I was gonna die. So I finally reached out for help. And who did I reach out to? Well, my mom. As much as my mom was absent, one thing that really saved me was that I could tell that woman anything. And that was such a journey. That was such a beautiful gift on my journeys. I could tell her anything, and I relayed to her. I was like, "Mom, I can't stop doing these pills." So she's like, "All right, well, let's go see your doctor, and we'll see what he says." So here I am, 18 years old, sitting on the bed of my primary care doctor's office here, next to a baby scale. There was a baby scale next to me. And I was telling him, I can't stop doing these pills. And he did a checkup on me, looked me over, and he said, all right, yeah, you're good to go. And I'm like, all right, well, where am I good to go to? And he's like, well, you're going to detox. And I was like, detox? And in my mind at that point, I said, only losers go to detox. Like, there's no way I'm going to detox. So I left that office, and the strong-willed person that I am, I said, no, I'm going to do this myself. And I got some methadone on the street. I don't know if you guys know what methadone is, but I was never part of a methadone clinic, thank God. But I managed to find some methadone wafers. I don't know, first time I've ever seen them. Still to this day, I've never seen them. And I got, I think, 2 or 4 of those. I broke them up in quarters, and I would eat one, I don't know, a quarter every day, a couple, I'm not exactly sure. It was a long time ago. And I managed to wean myself off. Now, I set myself up a little other, products such as maybe some Valiums and Klonopins, and I played doctor with myself, and I weaned myself off a $500 a day habit to the point where this November I'll be celebrating 17 years off opiates. And I can only say it was an act of the divine that I happened to be able to do that, because I don't think I could ever go through that again, because it was super painful. But I managed to detox myself from a $500 a day habit. And through the process, it was very, very painful. Now, 30 days into that experience, at this point, I was marking days, Xing off the calendar days every day I didn't do them. And 30 days, I wanted to jump out of my skin. I was full of anxiety, full of racing thoughts. And 30 days in as well, as my father's deep, deep secret wound up coming out in the newspaper. Now, when I say that is, as I mentioned earlier, my dad was a Catholic priest, and unbeknownst to me, my dad had allegations of sexual molestations, sexual abuse of minors while he was in the seminary. And let me back up a little bit. Now, at this point, I'm 17, 18 years old. And around 16, 17, I wound up, we got a computer in the house. And this is, kind of when computers first started getting really good. And, we had one. And, I would come downstairs at night and my dad would be kind of like, being all suspicious and whatnot on the computer. And I really didn't know what was going on until I began to find things around the house. But long story short is he was looking at pornography, and he was connecting with people on the internet. And connecting with people, what I mean by that is, I think he was going on some, extravaganzas or he's probably having sexual relationships with people on the internet. And I was well aware that this was happening, and after I kind of began to discover things and notes and pictures and things around the house, and I was having a very, very, very difficult time with that, as you can only imagine, as a young guy, 16, 17, trying to find my own sexuality at that time, as a young man, and trying to discover who I am. And yet my dad has turned from, Jesus Christ holier than thou to someone who's looking at pornography, and has a deep, dark secret. And actually, before I found out what was going on the computer, how I really discovered it and it came to light was, I forgot about this now that it comes up. I was sitting on the edge of my bed and something told me to go look under his mattress. So I did. Right? What is that something? I don't know. Spirit, maybe. And I looked under it, and there was like playgirls, and of young adult men, and I was like, wow, holy shit! Like, and it didn't surprise me in a way. It didn't, and it did. It surprised me in a way that this religious figure, but then it didn't surprise me for like kind of who he was. And kind of what he did, because growing up, we always had, he was always interested in the younger male population. And often at times I took a back seat to people that he was quote unquote helping. And I know this is a very deep dynamic, and I appreciate you listening so attentively. But there's a lot of moving parts to this, as you can imagine, and I'd need 4 or 5 podcasts to give you all the details, but I'm just kind of summarizing. And so here we are with this computer. It's all coming out to light, and now I'm strung out to the gills, and it comes out in the newspaper. And if you can, how do I say this? If you can only imagine the shame I felt to be connected to a pedophile. I mean, that is like, I mean, I'd rather have my dad be a murderer than a pedophile. So that was so difficult for me to really take in. You know, as a guy being connected to another guy, my dad that abused boys, right? That's just like that was like that was like holding up a tsunami wave. So as you can imagine, the shame and feelings of less than and the yuckiness being connected to him, that stuff all began to arise in me. But I began to actually work with it now that I look back. And like, because there was parts of me that didn't want to go into CVS in my town, didn't want to be seen, all these sort of things. And yet I had to face that and still hold my head up high and walk into these places and really understand, and through a lot of therapy, understand that that wasn't me, but that was him. So fast forwarding, I'm strung out, or I'm weaning myself off. I'm not strung out, but feeling strung out still 30 days. Terrible anxiety, depression. My dad's story comes on the newspaper, and also I was living at my buddy's house at this time because if you can only imagine, I had to leave my home with all that going on. And I was at a very difficult point. And I moved in. I was dating this girl at the time. I moved in with her and her family. And I had to really process and really work with what was on my plate at that time. And as you can imagine, it wasn't easy. And at this point, I was working, doing landscaping, building stone walls. And I had what's called these like father figures in my life. And I called them father angels. And one of them was my mom's old boyfriend at the time. And one was this guy, Brett, who helped me. He taught me how to build the stone walls, taught me how to swing a hammer, taught me how to kind of show up in life. And it was always those father angels that would really come in and really, come to the rescue to really support me in that time. And I know many of us who don't have a proper upbringing can identify with having people along the way. Maybe it's a foster mother or an aunt or uncle that really helped you, or someone that really gave you their time, someone from maybe your work, to really just like love you and nurture you. And that's what these guys were like for me. And I began to, excel a little bit with the outside work I was doing, and I was still suffering, but I managed to get out of that house I was living with a buddy, get off of Oxycontins, and I found myself living at my girlfriend's house, and I was still using other party favors, but wasn't using opiates. And about 2 years after using opiates, I fell into this depression. So I moved in with my girlfriend for a while, a year, I think. And then I moved in with a buddy and got my first apartment. And we were partying. At this point, I was just drinking alcohol. And I didn't want to use cocaine anymore because I really hated uppers. It was too much for my nervous system. After, selling tons of grass and smoking tons of grass, I would jump into my into my bed under the covers after smoking weed, and it wasn't working anymore. And then the booze was giving me tons of anxiety, and I was having bouts of depression. And one particular morning, I woke up, I was super depressed to the point where like my environment or my apartment was no longer like, it didn't feel like home. It was like this alienated place, and I was in like this dreadful state, and I wound up reaching out the second time for help. And guess who I reached out to? My mother. And she said, why don't you go to a meeting of AA? Why don't you come to one of these meetings? Let's see. At that point, my mom would bounce in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous. Still to this day, she never really stayed in, but she's sober today and doing wonderful. And but she bounced in and out, and she brought me, and I went and I listened. And for the first time, I heard these people speak, and I identified with the feelings, the anxiety, the impending doom, the depression. And I left that first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I said, "Ma, that was a great meeting, but I'm not an alcoholic." And that night I went out and I got totally wasted, just drinking booze out of the bottle, and almost got into a fight, almost drove my car off the road. It was just really, really crazy. And the next day I woke up with the same feelings of impending doom, anxiety, and I remembered what those people from AA said. So I wound up at my second meeting of AA. There I found a good friend who I used to smoke pot and take bong hits with when I was about 14. He was about 17 with his crew, and he had been hiding out in AA for like 3 years. So I got into AA and I got sober. I got sober in AA, and it was a great time in life. And I developed, new skills and had a new host of friends. And I was traveling to like young people's events and AA things. And it was a really exciting time in my life. And as I reflect, AA holds a special place in my heart, although I think it's lacking a lot of things. And, it's kind of an old, the verbiage is a little bit old, an old paradigm, but nonetheless, it helped a lot of people. It helped me. And I found myself sober. And, the days turned into weeks, the weeks turned into months, the months turned into years, and back into days. And I went on my journey, and it was beautiful. It was great. And now for a quick commercial break. Hey guys, maybe you're feeling stuck in your current path to recovery and know you have some work to do, but don't know where to turn. I was there too. Even after being in recovery for almost a decade, I was still riddled with fear, struggled desperately in relationship, found myself continuously trying to escape through external means, and at the end, my body was sick. We didn't get sober to continue to carry around the baggage of our past. We're here to thrive and live the best versions of ourselves. So you don't have to suffer like I did. I want to let you know about my passion and purpose in the form of service, and that's my work as a trauma-informed integrative recovery coach. I offer my services in the form of a one-on-one coaching program called Healing Beyond Recovery, where I take an integrative, holistic approach to help you get to the root cause of what's keeping you stuck so you can thrive in your life in recovery. You can learn more about me and my services on my webpage at www.mikegovoni.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. Once you're on the page, click Apply Now to schedule a complimentary discovery call with me today. Thanks for listening, and now back to the show. About a couple of years into recovery, I had a buddy approach me and say, "Hey, you want to leave that stone wall building business you're doing? You must be breaking your back and you want to come into the company." So I said, sure. And I, found myself in a cubicle in a top 1,000 Fortune company out here in Massachusetts. And I was a headhunter for engineers and aerospace people, military people. And, my boss at the time was sober. The guy who invited me into the company was sober. And us sober guys were just knocking it out of the park. And I was making six figures in my mid-20s. And I bought my first home. And after buying my first home, I renovated. I bought a 2-family. And I renovated the bottom floor. And I was so full of fear that I wasn't going to be able to pay the mortgage, and I was, ripping down walls at 2 a.m. and painting until 6 a.m. and then grabbing my headset and recruiting until 4 p.m. and doing it all over again. And in the process, I got sick. And here I am about 5 years into recovery, and I developed that universalis ulcerative colitis. And I was going to the bathroom a dozen times a day with often blood in my stool. And I was sick and I was stressed out and I was living in fear, and I had held all the trauma still in my body and hadn't quite really worked it out. But I was, doing different things and exercising a lot and going to the gym. And not that that stuff's bad, but to excess. I was doing it to excess, and home remodeling, and eventually the body, as Bessel van der Kolk says, the body keeps the score, and the childhood trauma and everything had caught up to me, and the dis-ease of life had become disease. And my biography of what I lived through was affecting my biology, and now it had come out in my colon. And I went to the doctor, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast. He gave me a bunch of drugs to take, and I said, great, I'll take 6 of those. I'll take some prednisone. I'll take this anti-inflammatory, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory too, and do it all, and swig it down with some water in the morning, and great, it'll be good, but not change anything about my life. And I did that for a year and got myself into remission off the medication, which was good. And I wasn't suffering as much. My symptoms went down, never really the same. And at this point, I had found a beautiful girl that I met in Las Vegas, and at a buddy's 30th surprise party. And I was traveling back and forth to see her in Palm Springs, and she was coming out here. And I was doing very well at the company still. And I was going to move out there to California to see how life was. So many of you guys may be able to identify in some way how the feminine can, take us in all different directions, especially when we're younger. And I found myself ready to go out west. And the last time she came down here, we realized, it probably wasn't the best thing. She had children. I didn't know if I wanted to be a stepdad maybe one day. So I called it off, and I decided to travel. So I traveled and grabbed a backpack, no idea where I'm going, terrible with directions. But I managed to get a one-way ticket into Mexico at the time, and 5.5 months later, I made it all the way down to Santiago, Chile. So it's really beautiful in sobriety when we begin to spread our wings and fly and, see the different cultures and countries of the world. And traveling for me, it allowed me to access a whole other part of me in life that I never knew was available. And, some people find themselves on the road, and that's kind of what happened to me. I traveled Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, Panama, Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, and Chile. And I found myself in Santiago, Chile, having to come home prematurely because I got a parasite in Guatemala, and it tripped off that UC, that ulcerative colitis, and I had to come home. So I found myself back at home and in very, very, very rough shape. Very, very, very rough shape. And I didn't know really what to do. So I hired a new GI doctor, one of the best guys in the country. And basically, long story short is at the end, they were giving me business cards to call surgeons to possibly remove my colon. Now, that didn't seem like a good idea to me. And at the very end of the treatment that they had me on was an immunologic drug that was put into my veins every 4 weeks by an IV bag. And every 2 weeks, they checked my liver to make sure I could process the drug. And lo and behold, after a year being on this drug, my liver enzymes were through the roof. And at this point, I had developed what's called multiple chemical sensitivity. So if anyone knows what multiple chemical sensitivity is, for me, it was like meeting death. And at the end, I couldn't even be out in kind of, the normal environment because of gasoline and diesel fuels, perfumes. They would send me directly into fight or flight. Now, in the context of the brain and trauma and fight or flight response, that Sense of smell is the only sense that goes directly to the amygdala. Now, your amygdala is like an almond-shaped piece of the midbrain in the limbic region, and it's responsible for like detecting threats. So my amygdala at that point was probably the size of a golf ball. No, I'm exaggerating, but it was going off over smells. Now, you can only imagine your sense of smell being heightened by like 1,000, and that's what it was for me. I could smell you downwind probably 60, 70 feet, and it would throw me into fight or flight. And that was probably the worst state of mind I've ever experienced. Now, when I share with you what I've been through as a child and, between, the things I experienced growing up and all the pain, this made it look like a skip in the tulip park. And I didn't know what to do besides I had to calm my autonomic nervous system. So there's a Tibetan prayer that says, "May you experience enough suffering to awaken your deepest wisdom and compassion." Woo! And at that point, I was experiencing the deepest suffering I had ever experienced. And at this point, the best GI doctor in Boston didn't know what to do with me besides send me to the hepatologist because of the drug was affecting my liver. It was giving me autoimmune hepatitis. And between the both of them, they conjured up and said, all right, well, maybe remove this guy's colon. And in 8 years, if you don't address this, you may have to remove your liver and get a liver transplant. So I said, that doesn't sound good to me. So I think I got to go. But before that, they gave me some prednisone, which brought down the autoimmune hepatitis. So I no longer had or have autoimmune hepatitis, but today I have my liver and my colon and doing well. Thank you. So I decided that wasn't a good form of medicine for me. So I left there and I began to research and I began to meditate. And when I say meditate, I began to meditate to save my life in a way where my nervous system was so hyper aroused that I had to build this intimate or create this intimate connection with my breath so I could calm my mind and body to access the moment. Because when I was thrown into this fight or flight, or for the listeners out there, when you're in fight or flight, you're in the state of hyperarousal, right? And in these trauma responses, it's like slapping that forever sticker, I say, and you think it's forever. So I would be in these hyperarousal states and I would think I was going to live my life like this. And then when that happens, you think, okay, maybe I should just kill myself because, or at least that's what I thought, because this is just horrific. And for the first time in my life, I began to experience, because of meditation, what was happening in my mind and what was happening actually in the present moment were two different things. So I had a split in consciousness where the observer began to observe the experience. And then if I had the observer being able to observe the experience, then who was I? Was I the observer or the experience, right? So it was very interesting. And let's just say because of meditation, I had a profound mystical experience that led to the shift of my consciousness to see beyond. First, what was very interesting that happened is that framework I grew up of born-again Christianity shattered like glass. And the sense of self, of who I am, shattered like glass. In the sense of there was no self to hold on to. Now, when I share this to you, I don't share now from a sense of an enlightened guru or anything like that. I had a profound mystical experience, and a lot of people do. And then I had to come back in this body, which was in itself a little, I guess, just disappointing. But I also agreed to come back here too, in the sense of, I have work to do and a life to live out, and I don't want to just kind of, hang up there in the ethers. I want to live, and I made that choice. And when I help people today to shift a little bit is I help them engage in the shift of their own consciousness, because healing requires us to engage in our relationship to what's happening. And when we do, profound healing can happen. Or when we experience divinity, or in this case, mystical experience, the healing of, the healing or identification, let me back up. The identification with the old self falls, and I open up to the sense of oneness beyond the trauma of what happened to me, beyond who I was, beyond this kid who was abused and neglected and unworthy and to experiencing this oneness with everything. So in the point of the mystical experience, I had a sense of oneness with everything. There was no sense of duality, right? I was the bird migrating. I was the acorn that burst into a 90-foot oak tree. The body had left, and I got to experience that beautiful, mystical, experience. And Carl Jung has a beautiful quote. He says, "To the degree which you can experience the numinous is the degree to which you are released from the curse of pathology." Now, if you look at the psychedelic research nowadays, there's clinical findings. To the degree which you experience that mystical experience is the degree to which you heal. So it's pretty powerful when you can experience yourself in life in a whole new way versus that very, very narrow sense of self, or narrow way of seeing and experiencing this reality. So that's why in my work, when I'm a big supporter of psychedelics for people in recovery, psychedelics for people who aren't in recovery, not that I don't do psychedelics often, but I know they can give you in the proper setting, substance, dose, guide, you can have this experience of the numinous, which frees you from the diagnosis, frees you beyond the, I'm bipolar. I have oppositional defiant disorder. I'm manic depressive. Just gonna fall apart and be a vegetable my whole life. It's like, no, we can heal. We can heal. And it's to experience our own wholeness that allows the healing to happen. Now, for me, that doorway was through meditation, not even psychedelics. I've done ayahuasca, and I've experienced psilocybin journeys, and I've done these things in recovery to experience deeper healing. But personally, my journey was through the door of Buddhist meditation. And yeah, as the son of a born-again Christian preacher, I had to really trust the wisdom within myself. And in doing so, I opened up to, the truth. Now, one of my mentors would say, paths are many, truth is one, therapies are many, healing is one. So there's many paths to the truth, right? Many divine teachers, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad, whatever, right? All these are we're beautiful teachers of light and love, and yet, man gets in the way, and, we do what we do to create systems and power and all that jazz. But, in the traditional spiritual teachings, a form of meditation is always present. And for me, if I had to share, what is, the pathway, to realization is it's through meditation. Right? After I had that huge awakening, and I was like, holy shit, right? Who is this guy Jesus, right? One of my thoughts was during that time was, damn, this guy Jesus doesn't have shit on this guy Buddha. And I said, no, that's not it. They were both teachers of the truth, but the truth is the truth. And when I say that, it's beyond conceptualization, it's beyond words, it's beyond the thinking mind, but it's an actual realization that sets you free. So I was blessed with this sacred illness so I could have a spiritual awakening and shift my consciousness, or as maybe like Joseph Campbell would say, if you guys, some of you guys relate to the hero's journey, right? We're all going on a journey, and we're all the hero of our own journey. And we get the call, and we refuse the call, and then we take the call, and then we have to go through this difficult trial and tribulation and conquer it and slay the dragon. Then we come back with the elixir, and that's kind of the story of the hero's journey. And then they bring the elixir or the sword back. And, today my journey has brought me to the work of helping others, of being of service. So when I had that awakening, I remember sitting on a bench. I was looking at these trees. The mind was completely still. And the leaves were shimmering like diamonds on this tree. I know it's difficult to believe, but once again, it's beyond this kind of conceptual mind. And this whole thought of like the days of me trying to save up for all this real estate. And don't get me wrong, it's not that I don't want to own real estate today, but that wasn't my main priority in saving up for a BMW 745, whatever it was, are over. And here I am, and I'm going to be of service to people. That's the message I got in that moment. And that led me to, doing my deep work and healing from that, irritable bowel disease. And part of that, to take a little detour, was I did a procedure called a fecal microbiota transplant, right? Yes, a fecal microbiota transplant, which means I took the poop of someone else and transplanted it in my colon to repopulate my microbiome or my microflora, to turn on the anti-inflammatory switch in my colon, per se. If 70 or 80% of the immune system is in your gut, and I have an autoimmune disease, and all of a sudden I transplant someone's poop into my colon, and my immune system stops reacting, that's pretty amazing, right? So that was a process that I underwent here, and I actually found a doctor to do it, although it's illegal to do it, I believe, by the FDA for IBD, irritable bowel disease. Why? Well, there's no money in people's poop, right? But that drug I was on was probably $20,000 a month. So I found myself, going to all these lengths to heal. I mean, I was eating all these crazy diets at one point, like raw meat, and, doing fecal microbiota transplants. I jumped on the plane and flew down to Florida, got it done by a board-certified GI doctor down there who was a miracle. It was just, I'm so grateful that man actually did that for me. And how he did it for me was, I apparently there's something called C. diff-induced ulcerative colitis. Now, C. diff is a bacterial infection you can get, which can kill you. You get it in hospitals, and it can be antibiotic resistant. And the FDA will allow you to do a fecal microbiota transplant for C. diff if you have it, if you're antibiotic resistant, but not for irritable bowel disease, right? And I think the cure rate is somewhere around 98+% for C. diff with fecal microbiota transplant. So he said, you have C. diff-induced ulcerative colitis, right? And I was like, yeah. And he said, come on down. So I went down there, and he went up there with a lovely colonoscope and repopulated my whole microbiome, and boom, turned on my digestion like that, and began to heal. It began to have formed bowel movements and get my life back, and that was amazing. And today I've had the pleasure of supporting people, and I have a couple of people now that I'm working with who have irritable bowel disease, to support them on their journey. And meditation still, if I may relay a powerful medicine to you, is meditation is medication. And it has the ability to lengthen your telomeres, has the ability to decrease the size of the amygdala, right? So we get out of that fight or flight. It thickens the hippocampus. It increases gray matter in the brain. It allows you to slip into a relaxation response. And we can't heal when we're in sympathetic overarousal. We have to drop into parasympathetic to heal. So, we have to begin to engage in the shift of our own consciousness to turn on the relaxation response so we can actually heal. And that's what meditation did for me, as well as opening me up to seeing how I got this way in the first place with diet and stress and holding on to everything so tight, right? At one point I was in the gym doing triathlons, lifting weights twice a day. And it was just, abusing my body and, through and through. And I had to really come to terms with, letting this stuff go and really heal. And I was holding all that in my colon. And one of the most beautiful quotes I've heard before is the organs weep the tears the eyes cannot shed, right? The organs weep the tears the eyes cannot shed. And if you can't let go of your past and grieve and heal what you've lost, then a lot of the times that disease becomes disease. And we really have to engage in the shift of our consciousness to see with new eyes. As Marshall Pro says, the voyage of discovery is not in seeking new landscapes, but in seeing with new eyes. So how can we see our life and our situation in a different way that leads to more wisdom, compassion, and healing? So that's been the journey of transforming my pain into purpose. And now that I'm on the other side of that, boy, does it feel amazing to have my health back, right? I used to ride road bike, and I had this carbon fiber bike that I sold to a buddy I worked with, never thinking I was going to be able to ride a bike again. Like, I was in that bad of shape where I never thought I could ride a bike again in my life, right? Talk about to see certainty in that which is uncertain, you're bound to suffer, right? Did you hear that? To see certainty in that which is uncertain, you're bound to suffer, which means I saw myself never being able to ride the bike, right? Imagine what frame of mind that set me. Oh my God, I can't believe this is life and all that and da-da-da-da-da. And then I sold it, and luckily I bought it back. But, that teaching right there in itself is another one of my favorite quotes, is we have to begin to understand that everything's in flux, right? Life is in flow. And even if you're listening to this in your worst time of your life, like I was there too, right? Contemplating doing a swan dive off the Tobin Bridge, right? And instead, I leaned into my suffering and transformed it, right? So there's a message that you take from this is it's no longer push away the suffering, but in fact, the suffering is the doorway through, right? The pain, right, is the portal in which the light shines through. And we need to begin to create a different relationship to the unpleasant in order to begin to find more peace, more acceptance, more compassion. And in that process of deep suffering, I had a beautiful heart opening, which one of my teachers, Jack Kornfield, would say, he calls it a sure heart's release. And it was an amazing experience. And it really allowed me to connect with my heart for the first time in my life. Like, if you're listening to this and you don't know you have a heart, or you don't know your heart opens and closes, you don't know that, like it's quite fascinating. And the heart is like, and that's the compassion, right? So in Buddha's teaching, we cultivate the heart and the mind, the heart for compassion, for kindness, for well-being, and the mind we cultivate for, tranquility and wisdom, and to know that, wow, I have this heart that really, can hold this compassion. And first I had to meet myself and where I was in my pain and my journey with a sense of compassion. And then that compassion began to open for others. So, there's one thing in AA that I just have to share on, which is like sick man's prayer. And, I believe the sick man's prayer, right, is really a bypassing of your own suffering first. So we can't just wish someone or wish someone's, suffering away or if we're holding ill will or hostility to just pray for them. We have to begin to turn towards our own hostility and suffering first and take care of that. And then we can offer, once we have that genuine sense of compassion for ourselves, we can begin then to offer that to someone else. But it first starts with us. It's not selfish, it's not self-centered, but we really have to begin to cultivate and heal the relationship with us first. And in doing so, we can allow our hearts to have that connectivity and connection to another being and their suffering. And that's really what compassion is to suffer, is to suffer with. Compassion is to suffer with someone in the aspect of, not going down in the deep abyss with them, but to holding their suffering, feeling that, connecting to that with them, right? And so that's been, the journey to sum it up here. I know it's we're getting into the time here, and I just want to shed a little light on some health and healing practices that I do on a day-to-day basis, and to answer a couple questions that people have sent me that I want to share with you that can maybe help you along your journey. And first, I want to say, meditation is the most powerful medicine that I've encountered, and believe me, I've done it all. If I've done a fecal matter transplant, then you can believe I've done most things. I haven't done MDMA therapy yet, but I've done a lot of things. And meditation on a consistent basis, and learning how to properly meditate, and knowing why you're meditating, and opening those channels or the chakras per se, so you can move that energy and ascension, is really the work here of us humans on this planet. So some health practices, and one of the questions was, what do I do on a daily basis? What are some of my morning practices? And I can say I wake up every morning and I start my day with a glass of room temperature water with lemon. And I allow that to cleanse the kidneys and liver, and just settle in with that. Come out to the backyard, see the red rocks, hang out. And then I go into the meditation room and I sit down. Now, I've been blessed to kind of make my own schedule out here and do my own thing because I have my own business. But if you're, part of a business or corporation, or you have to be somewhere at a certain time, then you may have to wake up a little earlier. You may have to really dedicate less time in the morning rather than, sitting for 25, 30 minutes like I do. You may have to sit for 5. But cultivating a mindfulness practice will change your life. It will change your life. And if I could say, if you're getting into meditation, to take a beginner's course to start, right? There's plenty of them online right now. And one thing I took was an MBSR course, 8-week course run by John Kabat-Zinn, and people he's trained. It's called mindfulness-based stress reduction, but it's really, the name is kind of awkward for the course, but it's really about working with meditation and learning how to do body scans, and really, interweave meditation in your day-to-day life. So meditation and mindfulness practice is key. And then the next thing I do is I exercise, right? And exercise could mean going on my road bike and going 5 miles, 10 miles. It could be doing 1 mile. It could be just walking around the block. It could be stretching in the living room and doing a couple of yoga poses for 10 minutes. It could be getting my heart rate up to max heart rate to increase brain-derived neurotropic factor to improve my cognition and neuroplasticity, right? If you're suffering from cognitive problems, or you want to increase your mood and mental function, you want BDNF in there. So, getting your heart rate up, if you're healthy enough to do so, to max heart rate in the morning, 2 to 3 minutes is great exercise, right? So it can be as simple as that. And then to answer another question is, what do I take for supplements? So after I'm done exercising, I'll come in and I'll take my supplements. And, I have a pretty regimented protocol because I suffered from autoimmune, and I have to really stay on top of that. So, but what I'm going to suggest to you are pretty much for people, just any and all average person out there is looking to take high quality supplements. Now, when I say this, I'm not giving medical advice on this episode here, but I'm just sharing my experience. And not all supplements are created equal. So finding a company that you like and that is very reputable and actually delivers 100% of its product in its pill or powder or liposomal, liquid system or whatever it may be, making sure you're not getting a bunch of binders and fillers and all that jazz that they can put in there at different times with not so credible companies. So getting a high-end company is very beneficial, and I actually give people access to my full scripts, which you can have access to professional-grade supplements at a discounted price, and that link will be in the show notes if that's something that interests you, and you can find all of these there. So glutathione is one of the top products that I take, and you can take that for anti-aging, or you can take that to support immune system, but glutathione is your body's most powerful antioxidant, and we live in a world that's full of toxins, right? Your water is possibly full of fluoride and chemicals, and if you're not eating organic food or eating pasteurized meats, you're getting, a lot of chemicals and or hormones in there. And to keep your glutathione system up and functioning, I supplement with glutathione. Now, I take it intramuscularly. I'm not saying to do that. Most people don't need to, but I don't produce enough of it. So I do inject it in my leg in the morning, but I also have a liposomal delivery system by Quicksilver Scientific that I take a couple pumps of it under the tongue, let it sit for 30 seconds, and that's how I take glutathione. But that is a wonderful product to take to support immunity, detoxification, and so forth. Another one is vitamin D and K2. Vitamin D does over 2,000 processes in the body, actually acts as more of a hormone, and the K2 to support immune health, bone health, heart health. So those are two supplements, especially if you're in the Northeast. If a lot of people suffer from seasonal affective disorder, and if you feel that that's you, then maybe you should get your vitamin D levels checked, because I've found that low vitamin D can cause some problems, including a not so healthy immune system. So another one I take is essential fatty acids. Now, they're called essential fatty acids for a reason, because we need them and don't make them. So getting them in through our food source or supplementation is so very important. So I tend to take one from Apex Energetics, which is called Brain E. It has high amounts of DHA to support cognitive and brain function and cellular health. So essential fatty acids are super important. And another two I take is a product called resveratrol, and turmeric. So these are really great substances. They're polyphenols, right? They can help reduce inflammation. They can actually support in the change of gene expression to reduce inflammation, and NF-kappa B and other inflammatory responses to help reduce inflammation. That's really the name of the game, people, is reducing inflammation. That's what we have to do. So if you're still going to AA meetings and eat a bunch of cookies and donuts and Dunkin' Donuts coffee, then you may want to switch it up so you can feel good. And once again, if you want better mental health, well, let's look at it like this. If 90% of your feel-good serotonin transmitters are made in your gut, and your gut is trash, how do you think that's going to affect your brain? Not so very good, right? So we want to get that gut on board and heal any symptoms, of course, or any bits of leaky gut is so important. That's when the tight junctions open up in your mucosal lining to let things through into your blood system, which causes an immediate immune reaction. So making sure our gut's healthy and making sure we're taking proper supplements. And the other one is a precursor to serotonin, 5-HTP, and that supports the pathway production of serotonin. I was on a SSRI for years, a decade ago or something. And, I suffer from depression on occasion. And I think it's very important to support that serotonin pathway. So those are some of the supplements that I take. And So I know everyone likes to learn from books, so I'm going to recommend maybe a top 3 or 4 books that I've read to support healing of trauma and support you on your path to learning about trauma and how it affects your body. One of them, of course, which is kind of the Bible of trauma, written by Bessel van der Kolk, is The Body Keeps the Score, which is an amazing book. It's deep. Sometimes when you read it, a lot of things come up, so give yourself some space and patience to do that. And The Healing Path by Marcus Barouche. I can put that in the show notes. I'm not sure the exact spelling of his last name, but it will be in there. In an Unspoken Voice by Peter Levine. Peter Levine is an amazing doctor and researcher and expert in the field of healing trauma somatically from the body. He came up with the protocol or modalities somatic experiencing, which is amazing and really helps you release trauma from the nervous system. And one of my favorite books is called The Polyvagal Theory by Deb Dana. It breaks down Dr. Stephen Porges's work on the polyvagal theory and how your nervous system actually works. And actually, I'm going to take a moment to just go into a couple actual modalities that can support you if you're suffering from trauma, which these books can give you a lot of resources for sure, and references and so forth. But to give you a couple of my own personal journey, is neurofeedback is a wonderful tool on helping you calm the autonomic nervous system, to regulate your brain waves and to reduce stress. And what's amazing about it is I have done neurofeedback and felt like I just took a Valium after, right? Which is pretty amazing because it's my own brain correcting itself and balancing the waves, so to speak, to calm the nervous system. And it's it's your own brain doing it. And what's crazy about this, well, not crazy, but insurance doesn't cover it because it works. And I suggest, if you're really suffering and stuck in fight or flight, that you look at neurofeedback, mindfulness, meditation, of course, and a couple other things here to really think about is doing a cleanse or protocol to heal your gut, which is very beneficial, making sure that you don't have leaky gut and make sure that your gut is functioning optimally, right? Regulating your nervous system. Neurofeedback is very helpful. Another one is myofascial release. That's a technique. It's like massage, but it's different. It's opening up the fascia system in your body, so you can actually allow that tension in that maybe kind of twisted fascia. What happens with trauma, the fascia, it's like a netting system over all the body, and it tightens and it crinkles and it gets twisted, and the practitioner opens that fascia. But also in that fascia is consciousness, is memory. So when they work on you, for me, right, a lot of those memories or just random memories will flow through, right, including the emotion underneath, which is actually the healing. And you can actually process and let go of that stuff. So MFR has been a wonderful tool for me along my journey. And those are some really practical things that you can do, modalities you can embrace to start your journey. To start your journey on healing, on awakening, and on experiencing the wholeness of who you are. And I think that's where many of us get completely veiled, is we can't see ourselves for who we are. And yet, every one of us here on this earth, even the guys who do horrific things, they're all, let's just say, made in his image or have the Buddha nature or Christ consciousness. We just become veiled in delusion, and to awaken and to go on this path of transformation and shift in consciousness is the journey. And I really think if the recovery community needs anything at this time, it's consciousness, it's awareness. And I hope to be a vehicle for that and a conduit for that and a teacher for that. And, it's only been through my own suffering that I have shifted and awoken to something more beautiful, to the present moment, right? As Bessel van der Kolk says, trauma is an illness of not being alive in the present moment. And I could identify with that statement through and through for a long, long time. So it's your birthright to feel comfortable in your own skin. It's your birthright to experience your own wholeness and to access and live and experience the joy in the present moment. So this has been a wonderful discussion with you and share with you. And I really want to say thank you for listening to this episode, if you've listened to it all the way through to this point. And, as I always end with, you can heal no matter what your story may be. So take care and be well.